Hi, my name is Claire Summers. I'm 26 years old and I'm about to share something that I have never told anyone online before. This isn't just a made-up horror tale or some random internet creepypasta. This is a real story, something that happened to me just 3 years ago, and I promise you every detail is burned into my memory like it happened yesterday. It's a story about my family, about betrayal, and about a kind of revenge that doesn't come from the living. I can't give away too much right now because I need you to understand it the way I experienced it, slowly, painfully, with every nerve in my body screaming for answers. Please read until the end because the way it all unfolded will change the way you look at family forever. And before we get into it, I really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like, and share this. It helps me tell more real stories like this one. This story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. I grew up in a quiet little town in Vermont, the kind of place where you know every neighbor's dog's name and people still wave when they drive past your house. But behind the closed doors of our old two-story farmhouse, things weren't as perfect as they looked from the outside. My parents, Margaret and Daniel Summers, were good people to everyone else, but inside those walls, I often felt like a stranger in my own home, and it wasn't until my grandmother, Evelyn, died that the real cracks in our family started to show. She was my father's mother, a stern but loving woman who raised him almost single-handedly after his father passed away when he was just 8. To me, she was a mix of warmth and mystery, the type who would bake you cookies and then over tea tell you unsettling family secrets that she'd whisper as if the walls themselves had ears. When she passed, we inherited her house, a century-old Victorian with creaky floors, dust-choked curtains, and an attic that always gave me the creeps, partly because she had told me once when I was little, if you ever hear footsteps up there when you're alone, don't go looking. They're not for you. I had thought it was one of her strange ways of keeping me out of dangerous places, but as we moved in after the funeral, I started to wonder if she had meant something else entirely. The first few weeks were uneventful. My parents busied themselves with unpacking and arguing about what to keep from her possessions. My younger brother, Jeremy, ran around exploring every corner of the house, and I mostly stayed in my room trying to adjust to the smell of the place, that mix of old wood mothballs and something faintly metallic. But then late one night I woke to the sound of footsteps directly above me, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. My parents were asleep. Jeremy's room was on the other side of the hall, and I knew nobody was supposed to be in the attic. I told myself it was the wood settling that old house grown people always talk about, but the steps were too measured, too heavy. The next morning I mentioned it at breakfast, and my father froze mid-sip of coffee before shaking his head and saying, "It's just the house, Claire." My mother gave me that warning look she used when she wanted me to drop a subject, so I did, at least out loud. But that day I went up there. The attic stairs were hidden behind a narrow door at the end of the hall, and as I climbed them, the air grew colder, heavy with dust, and I noticed deep scratches along the banister, like something or someone had gripped it too hard over and over. The attic itself was cluttered with boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, and a single trunk in the center, which I recognized from my childhood visits. My grandmother had always kept it locked, saying it held memories too heavy to carry. The lock was still there, but the strange thing was, I could see faint drag marks on the floor around it, as if it had been moved recently. That night the footsteps returned, only this time they stopped directly above my bed. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and then I heard a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was low, urgent, almost like someone was telling me to listen. The next morning I found Jeremy sitting at the kitchen table, looking pale. When I asked him what was wrong, he said, "I heard someone calling my name from the attic last night." My parents brushed it off again, but there was something in my father's eyes, a flicker of fear that told me he knew more than he was letting on. Over the next week, the activity escalated. Things in the attic would be in different places. We'd hear knocking in the walls, and twice I caught my father standing at the bottom of the attic stairs late at night, just staring up into the darkness. I confronted him one evening, asking if he'd been hearing the same things we had, and he finally admitted that my grandmother had told him never to open the trunk, that it contained something that bound the family together and would tear it apart if released. He didn't believe in ghosts, he said, but he believed in Evelyn's warnings. That same night I was woken by a loud thud from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of the trunk scraping across the floor. This time I didn't stay in bed. I grabbed my phone flashlight and crept up the stairs, my pulse hammering in my ears. The attic door was ajar, and when I pushed it open, I saw the trunk wide open. Inside were old photographs, letters, and something that made my blood run cold. A stack of newspaper clippings about my own family dating back decades. each one tied to a violent death, uncles, cousins, even my grandfather. All ruled as accidents or unsolved cases. And tucked beneath them a faded diary with my grandmother's name on the cover. The first page I opened to read, "Revenge never dies, it just changes hands." Before I could read more, the attic door slammed shut behind me and the footsteps started again, but this time they weren't above me. They were coming closer. I spun around, my flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hands, but the attic seemed empty, the air thick and pressing in on me as if the walls were breathing. Still, the sound of footsteps kept coming, slow and deliberate, circling me in the cluttered space until they stopped just inches behind me, and I swear I could feel a faint warmth on the back of my neck, like someone was leaning in close. I turned the light toward the spot, but there was nothing, only a sheet-covered chair and the shadows it cast, yet the feeling of being watched was so intense I couldn't breathe. My hands fumbled with the diary, tucking it under my arm as I bolted toward the attic stairs, but when I reached the door, it wouldn't budge. I yanked at the handle, slammed my shoulder into it, but it felt as though something on the other side was holding it shut. That's when the whisper came again, this time right in my ear. "It's your turn." The door suddenly gave way, and I stumbled into the hallway, nearly colliding with my father, who was standing there, wide-eyed, his face pale. He saw the diary in my hand and snatched it from me, shouting, "I told you to leave it alone." But I pushed past him, my heart still racing, and locked myself in my room. For hours I sat on my bed, replaying the voice in my head, the way it had said, "Your turn," with a kind of grim finality. The next day, Jeremy came to me looking scared. He told me he had dreamed of our grandmother, standing at the foot of his bed, whispering something he couldn't understand except for one word: justice. He said she had pointed toward the attic before fading away. I didn't tell him about what I'd heard, but deep down I knew it was connected. That evening I decided I needed to know what was in the rest of the diary, so I waited until my father fell asleep and quietly slipped into his study where he'd hidden it in the bottom drawer of his desk. I took it back to my room and began reading, my hands shaking with every page. The entries were detailed, spanning decades, chronicling a feud between our family and another, the Morrows, over land, money, and betrayal that had started long before I was born. According to Evelyn, members of our family had been targeted one by one, each death designed to look like an accident, but she believed something darker was at work, something that wasn't entirely human. She wrote of hearing voices in the attic herself, of seeing shadowy figures in the mirrors, and of making a binding pact to protect us. Though she never explained exactly what that meant, the final entries grew more frantic, her handwriting shaky, describing how she had trapped it inside the trunk, warning that if the seal was broken, the blood debt would resume. My stomach churned as I realized that by opening the trunk, I might have undone whatever she had done to keep us safe. That night the house felt different, heavier, like the air was thicker, harder to breathe. Around midnight, Jeremy started screaming. I ran to his room and found him standing on his bed, pointing toward the corner where the shadows seemed unnaturally deep. "It's in here," he cried. "It's watching me." My parents came running, but when my father stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind us, and the temperature dropped so sharply I could see my breath in the darkness. A voice began to speak, not a whisper this time, but a low, resonant tone that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "A life for a life, a debt unpaid." Jeremy clung to me, sobbing, and then just as suddenly the room went still, the lights flickered back on and the door swung open. My mother grabbed Jeremy and hurried him away, but my father stayed behind, looking at me with something between guilt and resignation. "There's something I never told you," he said quietly. "When I was your age, I saw it too. I made a choice to leave it alone, but now it's not going to stop." He explained that the Morrows weren't just another family. They were bound to us through something his grandfather had done, something that had caused their deaths and set this thing on a path of revenge that would never end until it had claimed enough from our bloodline. My grandmother had found a way to slow it down, to trap it, but never to destroy it. "It's in the attic because that's where the veil is thinnest," he said. "That's where it waits." Over the next few days, I noticed little changes, the way mirrors in the house would sometimes show shadows that weren't there when I turned around, the faint sound of breathing behind me when I was alone, and worst of all, the feeling that something was following me outside, even in broad daylight. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, but deep down I knew it was the same presence from the attic. Then one night, as I was brushing my teeth, I saw it just for a split second, reflected in the bathroom mirror behind me. A tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted into something between a grin and a snarl. I spun around, but the room was empty. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my toothbrush. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about the attic anymore. Whatever had been in that trunk was free, and it was moving through the house, choosing its moments, waiting for something, maybe for me. I didn't sleep that night, and in the early hours of the morning, I heard the front door creak open downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs and saw my father barefoot, walking slowly toward the attic door, his eyes glazed as if he were sleepwalking. I called his name, but he didn't respond, and when he started up the attic steps, I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I ran down after him, grabbed his arm and pulled, but he was unnaturally strong, his hand gripping the banister with such force that his knuckles turned white. "It's calling me," he said in a voice that didn't sound entirely his own. And then he wrenched free and disappeared into the darkness above. I followed, my heart pounding, the creak of each step echoing in my ears, and when I reached the top, I saw him standing in the center of the attic, facing the open trunk. "It says it will stop," he whispered, "if it gets what it's owed." I took a step forward, but before I could speak, the attic door slammed shut behind me again, and this time the footsteps began, not just around me, but inside my head. Sound inside my head was unlike anything I had ever experienced, not just footsteps now, but a steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat that wasn't mine, pounding louder and louder until it drowned out my own thoughts, and with it came images, flashes of things I couldn't possibly have seen. Men in old-fashioned clothes fighting in a muddy field, a woman screaming as her house burned, a pair of hands covered in blood clutching a rusted key, and then my father younger standing over a grave in the pouring rain with my grandmother beside him, her lips moving as if in prayer, but her eyes fixed on something in the distance. I staggered, clutching my head, trying to push the visions away, and when I opened my eyes, the attic looked different. The boxes and furniture were gone, replaced by bare rotting boards and walls streaked with something dark and sticky, and in the far corner stood the tall, gaunt figure I had glimpsed in the mirror. It was clearer now, impossibly long limbs, skin stretched tight over bones, eyes like black pits that seemed to pull the air out of the room. My father was kneeling before it, whispering words I couldn't understand, his voice trembling. "Dad, get away from it," I shouted, but he didn't even flinch. And then the thing turned its head toward me with a slow, deliberate motion, its mouth curling into that unnatural grin I'd seen before. "A debt unpaid," it said in a voice that was both inside my mind and vibrating in the air. "Blood for blood." My father looked back at me, then tears streaming down his face, and said, "Claire, I think it wants you." I froze, my mind racing, the pounding in my head so intense it felt like my skull might crack open, and in that moment, I realized the thing wasn't just feeding on fear. It was feeding on the guilt in our family, using it to bind itself to us. I lunged forward, grabbing my father's arm and trying to pull him back, but the creature raised one bony hand and I was thrown across the attic as if I'd been hit by a truck, slamming into the wall hard, enough to knock the breath out of me. Gasping, I scrambled to my feet and my eyes fell on the diary lying beside the open trunk. Pages fluttered as if caught in an invisible wind, and the words seemed to shift on the paper, rearranging themselves into something new. "The pact can be broken only by returning what was taken." My hand shook as I picked it up, yelling to my father, "What was taken?" But he only shook his head, muttering, "Too late." Too late. The figure began to move toward me, each step making the floorboards groan, and I could feel the cold radiating from it like standing in the heart of winter. I backed toward the door, fumbling for the handle, but it was locked again, sealing me in with it. Desperation clawed at me, and I shouted, "If it's revenge you want, take me." The thing stopped tilting its head as if considering, and then it took another step forward, its shadow stretching impossibly long across the floor. That's when I heard another voice, faint, almost drowned out by the pounding in my head, my grandmother's voice, sharp and urgent. "Don't give it what it wants, give it what it fears." I didn't know what that meant, but I remembered something from the diary, a line about how it couldn't cross boundaries of truth. With trembling hands, I reached into the seaweed trunk, pushing aside the clippings and letters until my fingers closed around something cold and heavy. The rusted key from my vision. The moment I touched it, the creature hissed, its grin faltering, and I felt a surge of strength that wasn't mine. I clutched the key and shouted, "You don't own us." And for a second, the thing flickered, its form blurring like smoke in the wind. My father looked at me, eyes wide, and said, "Claire, the cellar?" I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. The cellar door in the kitchen had always been nailed shut for safety. My parents had said my father had never gone near it, but my grandmother had once told me it was where the old debt began. I ran for the door this time, finding it unlocked, and bolted down the attic stairs. The sound of the thing's footsteps following faster, now heavier, shaking the floorboards. I tore through the hallway, down the main staircase, and into the kitchen, my father right behind me. We yanked the boards off the cellar door, each one splintering under our frantic hands, and the stench that hit us when it swung open was overwhelming, damp earth rot and something metallic. Like old blood, the stairs groaned under our weight as we descended. The flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness until it landed on a shape in the corner. A small wooden box carved with symbols I didn't recognize. My father's breath caught. "That's it," he whispered. "That's what they wanted." Back, we carried it up as the pounding footsteps grew louder, closer, until it felt like the walls themselves would collapse. At the base of the attic stairs, the figure appeared again, blocking our path, its voice a low rumble. "Return it and the debt ends." For now, my hands tightened around the box, my instincts screaming not to hand it over, but my father was already reaching toward the thing. In that moment, I remembered my grandmother's words, "Give it what it fears," and instead of giving it the box, I stepped forward and slammed the rusted key into the carved lock. The box flew open and a blinding light burst from within, so bright it seared my eyes. The figure shrieked a sound so inhuman it rattled the windows, and began to dissolve, its shadowy form twisting and writhing until it exploded into nothingness. The house went silent, the air suddenly warm again, but as I turned to my father, I saw the look on his face. A mix of relief and dread. "It's gone," I said, my voice shaking, but he shook his head slowly and whispered, "No, it's free." The way my father said, "It's free," sent a chill through me, far colder than anything the creature had made me feel, because deep down, I understood what he meant. We hadn't destroyed it, we had only broken whatever boundaries had been keeping it tied to the attic, and now it could go anywhere, do anything, and it was no longer bound to our house. That night the silence was unbearable. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every creak of the old wood making me flinch, every shadow in the corners of my room making my heart pound. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to find my bedroom window wide open, the curtains blowing inward, though I was sure I had locked it before going to sleep, and on the windowsill lay the rusted key, the same one I had used to open the box, only now it was warm to the touch, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. I shoved it into the drawer of my nightstand, but sleep never came again, and when the sun rose, I went to find my father, only to discover he wasn't in the house. My mother said she had heard the front door close around dawn, but assumed he was just going for a walk to clear his head. We searched all day, calling neighbors, checking every road and trail, but it was like he had vanished that night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the key, turning it over in my hands, wondering if it was connected when the phone rang. I picked it up to hear a man's voice, low and unfamiliar, saying, "Debt paid in full." For now, then the line went dead. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the receiver, and when I looked up, I saw Jeremy standing in the doorway, pale and trembling, saying he had dreamed of Dad walking into the woods, following the tall figure and disappearing into the trees without looking back. We called the police, filed a missing person report, and over the next week search teams combed the area with no results. But the strange thing was the house itself felt lighter, the oppressive cold was gone, the whispers had stopped, and for the first time in months, Jeremy slept through the night. Part of me wanted to believe that maybe my father had given himself up to end whatever curse had been on our family, but another part feared he was still out there somewhere with the thing, or worse as part of it. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly settled into a fragile routine. Then one rainy evening in late October, I went up to the attic for the first time since that night, my flashlight cutting through the dusting cobwebs, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The trunk was still there now, lying on its side, the lock broken, the inside empty except for a single folded scrap of paper. I unfolded it and read my grandmother's handwriting. "It will come again, be ready." My stomach nodded, and I left the attic without looking back. A year passed without incident until one night, while closing the shop where I worked in town, I caught sight of a figure standing across the street in the shadows. Tall, motionless, watching. The streetlight flickered, and for the briefest moment I saw its grin before it turned and vanished into the darkness. I didn't tell Jeremy or my mother. Some part of me knew that acknowledging it would only draw it closer. But I started keeping the rusted key with me everywhere. I went in my pocket during the day, under my pillow at night, as if it were both a weapon and a warning. I don't know when it will return or what it will want next, but I do know this: family debts don't end just because you want them to, and revenge has a way of finding you no matter how far you run. Thanks for reading my story. If you want to hear more real life, dark experiences like this one, please subscribe, like, and share this. Story is written and edited by Dark Life Side Diaries.